If your car idles quietly at traffic lights, it may already be destroying itself, and you won't hear it, feel it, or see a warning light until the engine is beyond saving. This isn't about aggressive driving, racing, or abuse. This damage happens while the engine is doing nothing, while RPM is low, while everything feels calm and normal. And that is exactly why so many modern engines die without drama, without noise, and without giving their owners a chance to react. Idle feels harmless, but for today's engines, it is often the most dangerous state they ever operate in. And almost no one is warned before it's too late. Every single month, we open and repair roughly 80 failed engines. Different manufacturers, different designs, different owners, and completely different driving habits. Yet, when we examine the damage closely, the pattern repeats with almost unsettling consistency. Bearing surfaces wiped clean of oil, crankshafts scarred by metal-to-metal contact, and heat damage that can only come from lubrication failure. Out of those roughly 80 engines, idle-related oil starvation is one of the most consistent damage signatures we see. This is not theory, and it is not speculation. It is forensic evidence taken from engines that did not survive. What makes this problem so dangerous is that it contradicts what most drivers believe. People assume engines wear out under load, at high RPM, or during long highway drives. In reality, modern engines are usually safest in those conditions because oil pressure is high, oil flow is strong, and the hydrodynamic oil film separating metal surfaces is stable. At idle, the exact opposite happens. Oil pressure drops to its lowest possible level, oil flow weakens, and the lubrication film thins to the point where it can no longer reliably protect critical components. This next part is where most engines lose the fight. Modern engines are designed to survive idle conditions with oil pressure that is mathematically sufficient under ideal circumstances. The system works only as long as nothing is worn, nothing leaks, and nothing fails. The moment real-world aging enters the picture, that balance begins to collapse. Oil pressure is not a belief system and not a matter of opinion. It is not something that can be debated away. Oil pressure is pure physics, and physics does not compromise. That is why we built a controlled experiment to answer a question most people never think to ask directly. How much oil pressure does an engine actually need to remain safe at idle? Not in theory, but in reality. To understand why this problem exists at all, you need to understand the impossible position modern engine developers are in. They must satisfy customer demand for power, customer expectation of longevity, and extremely strict emissions and carbon dioxide regulations at the same time. Of these three forces, emissions dominate everything. If the engine does not meet those standards, it cannot be sold, no matter how durable it is. To reduce emissions, internal friction must be driven to the absolute minimum. That leads to narrower piston rings, smaller bearing journals, thinner oils, and reduced oil flow. Most critically, it leads to oil pumps that are engineered to be just large enough to pass efficiency tests. These pumps deliver exactly the pressure required under test conditions, and not one bit more. Every additional tenth of a bar increases resistance, consumes fuel, and raises CO2 output. On paper, the system is perfectly optimized. In real engines, that optimization removes the safety margin entirely. This is where math stops working in the real world. We prepared a crankshaft assembly and spun it externally at roughly 1250 RPM, a speed typical of idle operation. Oil was supplied from outside, and pressure was controlled precisely. Using transparent three-dimensionally printed bearing shells, we were able to observe exactly how oil behaves inside the system. On paper, this setup should have worked. In reality, it didn't, even once. As the crankshaft rotates, oil inside the internal passages is subjected to centrifugal force. Like water in a spinning wheel, it is thrown outward, away from the center of rotation. However, to lubricate the connecting rod bearings, oil must flow inward, directly against that force. Theoretical calculations suggest this should require only about 1/10 of a bar. But those calculations assume a perfectly sealed system that does not exist in an actual engine. In practice, we observed that it takes closer to 3 to 4/10 of a bar just to move oil where it needs to go. And that is before accounting for leakage. Engines are not sealed systems. Oil escapes through main bearings, connecting rod bearings, and every designed clearance in the engine. Even when new, pressure is constantly being lost. This is the detail that destroys engines without triggering a warning light. As engines accumulate mileage, bearing clearances increase, leakage grows, and oil pressure drops further. But bearings are not the only consumers. One of the most underestimated components in modern engines is the piston cooling oil spray nozzle. These nozzles spray oil beneath the pistons to manage temperature and are intended to remain closed at idle. If even one fails and stays open, system pressure can collapse almost instantly. These are controlled leaks, and when control is lost, oil pressure disappears faster than the pump can compensate. Hydraulic systems add another layer of vulnerability. Timing chain tensioners and camshaft adjusters depend on oil pressure not just for lubrication, but to apply mechanical force. When pressure drops too low, chains lose tension, valve timing drifts, and engines begin to rattle. That rattling sound at idle is often the first audible warning, long before catastrophic failure occurs. Yet, it is frequently ignored because the engine still appears to run normally. The cylinder head is where the consequences become unavoidable. It is typically the highest point in the engine and the farthest from the oil pump. It sits at the end of the supply chain. If oil pressure is only barely sufficient at the pump and steadily consumed along the way, very little reaches the camshaft bearings. Without adequate pressure, the oil film collapses. Metal contacts metal, and wear accelerates silently and rapidly. As engines age, their demand for oil pressure increases, but the oil pump does not adapt. It continues to deliver only what it was designed to supply when the engine was new. There is no compensation for wear and no additional capacity. The engine's needs grow, but its supply remains fixed, and that imbalance shortens its life. After repairing thousands of engines and measuring countless systems, one number continues to appear. Below this value, engines may survive, but they do not last. Below this point, wear accelerates invisibly. That number is 1.3 bar of oil pressure at warm idle. Anything under that is living on borrowed time. This is why oil pressure warning lights are so misleading. Most switches activate at around half a bar. By the time that light turns on, serious bearing damage has usually already occurred. The light does not protect the engine, it confirms the damage. At that point, the repair decision has already been made for you. The most important advice is simple and practical. Measure instead of assuming. Warm the engine fully, let it idle, and check the oil pressure. If the value is below 1.3 bar, action should be taken, whether that means inspecting the oil pump, adjusting oil viscosity, or restoring a safety reserve that modern engines no longer have by design. This is not about pushing the engine harder. It is about giving it back the margin it lost. Modern engines do not fail because drivers abuse them. They fail because they are engineered to survive only under perfect conditions. Idle is not harmless. Silence is not safety. Quiet engines don't warn you. They fail politely. And they fail permanently.